Alright, it's just a quick instructional workbench video to show you how to get rid of one of the weak points in these Outback Furies, which is the central transmission gears. You can change them from the stock plastic ones here to these metal ones here, so they won't strip anymore. Now, I'll put the link to these, but they were £12. I think the standard set there are about £5, but these will last. They're not going to grind off like the standard ones do. Now, it's a bit of a annoying fault. We were out with this the other week. It lost drive. It sounded just like a strip spur, which is common on, you know, many vehicles. So we had a look. I replaced the spur gear. It was still doing it. Now, the way to diagnose it was, I had this cover off at the time. If I gripped the wheel and tried to, you know, move the vehicle forward, the gears would just spin. The spur gear would spin, but there'd be no drive. So I knew it was something internal. It's where the gears go there. Big one, medium one, little one. Although it's a pretty simple job, a lot of people are daunted by doing gearbox stuff, so I just thought I'd do a quick how-to. You can do it with the motor on or the motor off. I think I'm going to try and fiddle with the motor on, as I've just set the mesh up really nicely. These are actually working fine at the minute, but I want to bulletproof it rather than it going wrong when we're out playing. I'd rather I did it nice while I'm warm and dry. So it's really simple to get the box off. You've got the two grub screws for the prop shafts. If you remove those, the props will just pull off. Obviously, they might be in a different position. Then underneath the vehicle, you've got the 4 Allen key headed bolts there. Then your transmission's gonna come right off. So yeah, I don't really think you need to see that. If you can't do that, find another hobby. But I'll be back with you in a minute. Right, so the gearbox is off the chassis. I think while it's off, I might fill some of these cavities as well, because they just get filled with garbage. It's really annoying. I might silicone those. Anyway, that's irrelevant. And also, I'm going to be really awkward and do it with the motor in place, because I've meshed it really nicely. This isn't actually going to affect the mesh at all. So when you get it off, there's 2 screws there for the gear cover. Boom, there you go. Pinion gear, spur gear. So they're in mint condition. They've just been replaced as well. As I say, this isn't currently broken. It looks like, you'd think it had a slipper clutch. It's got that nut there. It's lying to you. It doesn't. All that does is hold on a plastic plate back there with three little locating nubs, and you've got the 3 screws. So your next job is to undo these 3 screws, remove your spur, undo that one, and then the plate will come off. There's a very small, if it'll focus, there's a very small spacer in there as well, which you need to keep. It keeps the gear at the right distance away so that it meshes nicely with that. So as you take things out, try and lay them down on your workbench, get nice and organised, and lay them down in order. So you go gear, spacer, you know, bolts at the end. Otherwise, when you know, say your phone goes, you get distracted, and then all of a sudden, you're just in a big jumble of bits. So, yeah, we get that off. We do stage by stage. No point showing you me undoing a screw. I know how to undo a screw. I'm sure you do as well. So, we'll come back when that's off. Right, that's now the spur gear off. And as you can see, you've got a bearing in there. Now, you want to be checking through your bearings as you're doing this, because if your gears are worn or broken, you know, if you've been crawling, got wet, chances are your bearings aren't going to be great. There's that small spacer piece I was on about. Obviously, it's all going to be cleaned up as it goes back in. So you see the 3 studs protruding there. If you look round at the back, we now want to undo those 3 Allen heads, and then the gearbox. See, look, that's got grime in. That's only 1 run old. The gearbox is then going to become free. You've got these orange spacer bits. So again, keep hold of everything as it comes out. And you've got 1 Allen head on this side. Sorry, I'm sort of doing this as I go along. 1 Allen head on this side, where you're just going to need to hold it with a wrench there. So, yeah, we get that undone and come back to you again. There you go. So the gearbox is now free of the mounting plate. Joins it to the motor. So that's what you get there. And you can see how it works now, because if you've got your spur gear on here being driven, as that turns, the 2 outpush shafts turn. They're doing your prop shafts. Prop shafts are doing your diffs. and that's how you get movement. So they're the screws that have come out with the little spacers on. You're now able to split this in half, and if you're not sure on what you're doing, this is when the sort of scary bits start, because you start seeing all the spinny things and you go, oh, it's so complicated, but really it is pretty simple. So that bearing there is going to come out along with the casing. I'll get back on and I'll show you its guts. So there we are, that's the innards of an Outback Fury gearbox. Now, the shaft there that attaches to the spur gear, it's got that gear on the back there. It's all very greasy at the moment, so I've just rebuilt it. You've got one of the large bearings there. There's only 2 bearing sizes in the entire car. So this is a 15 by 10 by 4. Then you've got 5 by 10 by 4s, which are the smaller ones like those, the wheel bearings. That gear there, which is that one, so you can see that has a hollow. That runs a bearing in each side, spins around that shaft there. And then the largest gear there ends up with the output shafts going through it, and that has one large bearing in that half of the case and one large bearing in that half of the case. I'll take it out so you can see there. So that actually rotates on those bearings. This one comes out. Now that little shaft inside there may be the only bit that causes you aggro, because last time I just had to pop it in my vise so that, as you can see, so that the gear was on the vise. Let me see if I can show you. Like that. So the gear's supported on the vise and the metal shaft's down there. And what you can do is very lightly tap that just to make it come through those bearings. So a very tight fit. You can also do it on the top of a small socket. Anything that means that you can tap the shaft downwards while the gear stays where it is. So all you've really got to do is swap these gears over. It's not very difficult. They all pull out. This one has got the shaft on it. It pushes through. You remove that, a bit like a wheel hex. Slide the new gear on, replace it. That one, you pop the shaft out. You slide the new gear on with bearings, and that one, again, you simply push it out. It's got a pin. You slide the new one on a locating pin, replacing the bearings if you need to. I know these are only 1 run old, so they're fine. Give it a slather of grease and reassemble it. So I'll break it down into its smallest amount of component parts, show you that, and then we're good to go. Yes, I had the same again with this one, where that shaft was really tight in there. So put it on the vise. You can get something like that, tap it gently with a hammer, and then it just drops out the bottom, but it saves the gear from going everywhere. Then you just need to remove those bearings and replace them in that gear there. So simple to see now. That gear slides onto there, and that gear slides onto there. Really easy. And any bearings you have, so you got bearing at the top there, bearing there, bearing there, just check them over. If you're not sure if they're any good, what I normally do is get a Phillips head screwdriver, put the bearing down onto the sort of point of the screwdriver until it's snug, then you can spin the outside. If it's all gritty and horrible, change it out. If it's nice and smooth, waz it back in. Alright, that's all swapped over to the metal gears now. So you see that one, it's got the bearings in. That one's on the output shafts. That one's on the shaft that goes to the spur gear. And I've sort of cleaned those up a bit now. Now I'm going to put a bit of grease in here. Everyone says about different things with RC cars, marine grease, general grease. I mean, I've got a real Jeep, which is hanging at the minute, but believe it or not, I do look after it. I've just got some grease I use for that. You know, I'm going to put it in there. It just sort of, it lubricates the movement of the gears a bit, but mostly it's to stop water ingress and that badly. You know, you put it sort of around the bearings and everything, it keeps those from getting too bad. But the main thing with these things, you've got to look after them between runs. If you just take them down the woods and then get them wet, gritty, and whack them back on a shelf, look at all these. These are all bashed hard. They're all clean. Because it's the only way you can come back next time and use them. Otherwise, they'll just be hanging and rusty. But anyway, grease it up. I'm not going to tell you what to buy. I just used that. I mean, it's a bit different. If you're doing the gearbox of one of these, you know, these spin so fast that if you use a regular grease, they might break it down. It might not do any good. These are really trudging along quite slowly. And in my opinion, as long as you maintained it, as long as you greased it up, you know, anything's fine. Use your cat's ear wax. The main thing is, you know, you're just giving it that extra little bit of protection. So, like a Haynes manual, whack it back together. It's the reverse of how you took it apart, really. The only thing I'll get back to you with is checking the mesh. Imagine if you move the motor or your spur was shredded, you wanted to redo that. You know, I'll just have a quick mesh rundown. But yeah, grease it up, slap it back together, boom. Look at that, look. That's some manly gearing right there. Okay, so the gearbox is all back together now. I've tried to clear off as much grease as I can from everything. When I put this back together, the grease came out all the gaps here and out the screw holes. But you know, if it's packed with grease inside, there's no room for dirt and water to enter. So it all goes back together. You can see there the spacer that was in there, the orange spacer's there. And I say, you really want to keep these output shaft areas clean, because any dirt that's on those when you're driving will stick to that grease if it's still there. So yeah, it's not a good thing to have loads of extra grease anywhere. It doesn't give you any benefit. Now, as for meshing, this is actually meshed okay, because you know, we've done stuff from a fixed position. We've not changed the position of the gear shafts, but really basic. But you've got these two here, and as you loosen those, you can move the motor back and forth, and it will change how these two gears interact. Now, there's no exact science for meshing. I like to just have it with a tiny bit of lash so that you just see that amount of movement. These are a fine gear. They're a 48 pitch, but if you can just about, I don't know if you'll be able to hear that. Just that little tap. Again, everyone's got their own opinion on it, but for me, you know, if you have it too tight, the motor can get hot as it's really fighting against itself. They're not always perfectly round either. Sometimes you'll spin them and you'll find a tight spot. But you want it, you know, not loose, not tight. That to me is just about right with one of these. So you'll find your own way. There's no exact science. So just reassemble now. All I'd suggest is make sure your output shafts are nice and clean. And when you put your prop ends back on, find one there, you just want to get your grub screw, give it a bit of lock thread, the blue stuff, really make sure there's no grease or anything there. You waz it on, obviously, the flat section, nice and tight with a bit of blue Loctite, and you want to be doing that 24 hours before you go out and play, ideally, because people try and do it out in the field. They go, oh, it hasn't worked. Yeah, it needs to cure. It's not super glue. So give it a decent amount of time. And I say, before I put it back in, I'm actually going to clean those and probably fill them with some silicone so I don't get filled up with dirt in the future. So that's it. All back together. Say, whack a bit of Loctite on those. Make sure you got all the grease off here and the output shafts. And if you've got time, just take the rear ones off and Loctite those as well. And the only other thing I found, which I've not found on this before, the rear axle had like a load of play in it, and it turned out that this nut and bolt here, it is a nylock nut, but they were loose, so the whole top strut could move, so the axle had a load of twist. So give those a check. They're sort of symmetrical. They're the same on the front, and that's it. Nice and quiet, all meshed nicely. Shouldn't strip. Ready to rock. Hope that helps.